Let's jump in and have David start. David, I think it's probably best for you to reintroduce yourself because I think Fatima and
Sure.
Shirunim were not here last time. And Bilal, I don't know
Okay.
if you were here last time either, but yeah,
And Paul, will I have about 30 minutes?
yeah,
30
exactly.
minutes. Okay. So let's say 12:40. Okay. So hi. Yeah, I'm David Meskill. So I got my PhD, my doctorate in history, European history at Harvard. And I've taught at colleges and now at something called a high school early college. So it's sort of the kids or the students are between 14 and 18 years old, but they are also earning some college credit. Um, and I teach courses on globalization and world history. But of course, there's so much to know. There's a lot I don't know. Um, okay, so last time I think I ended by talking about some of the advantages, the good results of globalization of trade, including basically all sides being able to gain, to being able to profit. This expansion of trade around the world coincides with and probably is related to the tremendous increase in wealth around the world, wealth that is unevenly distributed, which we'll get to today. So today I wanted to talk about some of the downsides or challenges of globalization. So maybe I will. I only have 30 minutes, but I'd love to save some time for your questions or your observations about your own countries or own situations. So I'll try to keep that in mind. Let me just go. Let's see. I do share screen. And then I think I do here. All right. So let me just actually go. All right. So, oh, wait a second. I have to get this thing off here. This was the last slide that I ended with. Uh, okay. All right. So we'll move on to this. So some problems of globalization. Uh, Again, these are going to be, you know, fairly, the way I describe them will be fairly broad, general, but maybe they'll be helpful for your understanding, I hope. Okay, so one problem. Oops, sorry. Can everybody see this the screen? Yeah. Okay. All right. So let's see. All right. So one problem is simply something that was unknown in the world until maybe 200 years ago. That our economies, that people, that companies produce too much. That was not the problem that the world faced, and up to until about 200 years ago, roughly speaking. So this has contributed to something that we're all aware of, probably the climate crisis, various more local forms of environmental damage. I think maybe in some ways less visibly, it one could argue that this emphasis on production, on wealth, on purchasing things, on consuming things, going to the store, shopping, may also undermine other values that we consider important. So, for example, the value of community, right? Uh, I'm certainly aware of this problem of overproduction. I think I might have mentioned last time that I'm in the process of moving now, changing apartments. And so I'm going through all of my closets and just I have two kids and just finding all of the toys that they have received, and they're in broken pieces and they were played with for a couple of days, and then anyway, so this is maybe more of a sort of a first world problem, but I'd be curious to hear if you see that also in your own lives as well. All right, so moving right along at a fast clip. Um, okay, so has globalization contributed to a problem of growing inequality? Well, so first of all, let me make a couple of distinctions. Um, so one distinction is that inequality or growing inequality does not necessarily mean that globalization and trade causes poverty, right? You could have a situation in which some individuals are, doing more or less as well as they have done in the past in terms of their income, and other individuals are doing much, much better. Or you could have a situation in which even relatively poor people are doing slightly better, but the wealthiest are doing much, much better. That would be inequality. Actual increases in poverty would be that some people are materially becoming worse off. So here, what I'm addressing is this problem of inequality, not necessarily growing poverty. I think it's probably harder to make the case. One could make it, but I think it's harder to make the case that globalization contributes to outright poverty. But it's easier to make the case that it contributes to inequality. I saw a hand up, Begum.
Yes. So far it's very clear. Thank you for the explanations. I have a question. Growing inequality, can we also say that this concept refers to uneven developments that we generally see in globalization?
Yes.
Uneven developments.
Fantastic. Because the second distinction I want to make is that one can talk about inequality between countries or between regions of the world on the one hand, and or one can talk about inequality within a country. So inequality between individual people, or let's say between families, right? So let me just on my slide here. Oops. So okay, again, so between nations or countries or regions, one could talk about that. So let me show you a slide. Okay. So this is maybe a little bit hard to interpret, but so this shows you this slide goes from 1820, so 200 years ago, to roughly today, 2010. And what this shows you is different countries or regions, right? The USA is in blue, Europe is yellow, China is red, etc. And it shows you their share, their portion of total economic output, right? So if we go back to 1820, we look at red, China was producing a third of the world's total goods and services economic output. Europe, where's my thing? Europe was producing 27%. What is green? Green is India. India was producing 16%, right? And then we get the United States, the new country, only 2%. And what I want to show you, we're not going to go over every development here, but what we see is that in some cases, there are real changes over time, right? So for example, let's take China, the red line. China, if you follow China today, you know that China is growing fantastically, and China is, has arguably the second or even first largest economy in the world. Well, but that followed after China's long decline in terms of its relative share of economic output. So for a long time, China did not do well in a globalizing world for various reasons. And over the last roughly 40 years, it's begun coming back maybe to its previous place as one of the largest producers in the world. Europe, we see, which drove the process of globalization over many centuries, was expanding until maybe around World War One, and then it sort of began a gradual decline. India, if we look at the green line, also declined, and in the last few decades has begun to grow as a share of the world economy. So my point here is that to answer this question, whether globalization has worsened inequality between countries, it really depends on. I don't think that there's a single answer to say yes, it has increased inequality, or no, it hasn't. And different parts of the world have experienced different outcomes, different fates. To a large extent, and I'll get to this a little bit later, I think these rising and falling shares of global output depend on the kind of governments countries have, the kind of government policies that are pursued. So economic strength or economic success, to a great extent, depends on the kind of government you have, which we'll talk about in more detail. Okay. So if there's a phrase, kind of a memorable phrase, people talk about the rise of the West. Maybe the rise of Europe and the United States, et cetera. That was happening, over the last few centuries, but over the last few decades, people have talked about the rise of the rest. So maybe the really fast growing countries today are not European countries, are not the United States, but are in outside of the West. All right. So now, if we look at going back here, oops, wait a second.
By the way, the rise of the West, the rise of the rest, includes countries that in which you guys are in.
Yes.
So, for instance, Brazil, Turkey,
Yes.
well, Pakistan to some extent, India,
Yeah. Yeah.
and China, of course, and South Korea. Those are all the place. The rise of the rest. It's countries across the world
Yes.
are developing quickly.
Yes, yes, exactly. So it's not just China and India, it's many, many other places. Not all, and some of those places have had their ups and downs, which we can talk about. Let me just turn to the next kind of inequality, inequality between individuals or between families within countries. Let me try to, hold on a second, go back to my, go back to, oh boy, let me see if I'm going to be able to do this here. No. Okay. Are you able to see this now?
Yes.
Oh wow. Okay, that worked. Fantastic. All right. So these graphs are actually from that website that I showed you last time, ourworldindata.org. So there are different ways to measure inequality within a given country. There's something, I didn't put it on the slide. Maybe Paul could write it in the chat. It's called, one way is called the Gini coefficient. That's an attempt to look at how much different segments of a population are receiving, and then to come up with a single number, which then allows you to compare inequality in Bangladesh, inequality in Turkey, inequality in Liberia with inequality anywhere. These two charts are not showing you that. These two charts are showing you over here, what they are both looking at is if we take the richest 1% within a given country, what percentage of the total income does the richest 1% earn? So if we look in some countries, and this is in some countries like the United States, where we have a bad problem of inequality, the richest 1% now earns 19% of all of our income. In Canada, it's 15%. Italy, it's 12%. And here, if you look at this chart, sorry, it's a little, well, can I get this to move here? Sorry. This chart shows you over the last century or so, from 1913 to now, and we see that inequality was really bad in these countries a century ago. Then inequality improved, right? That's this dipping here. And over the last 40 years or so, it's gotten bad again. So in countries like the United States, many people attribute our current problems of inequality to globalization, at least in part. And I think that's right. If we look over here on the right-hand side, these are countries, these are countries where there was a century ago also bad problems of inequality. It's measuring the same thing, the richest 1%. And that richest 1% lost share, lost out, relatively speaking. But even over the last 40 years, these countries have stayed at the same level of inequality. So these two charts suggest that comparing this U shape to this L shape, globalization by itself does not necessarily worsen inequality, right? And we'd have to look at these two different sets of countries to talk about what is it about the U-shaped countries that has led to worsening or improving then worsening inequality. What is it about the L-shaped countries that has led to improving inequality and then retaining that improvement? So it's a complex question. Globalization can, I think, contribute to inequality between individuals, but does not have to. So again, in both cases, maybe I did not give you a yes or no answer, and it's complicated. I know there was a lot of these graphs are maybe a little hard to understand. Did anybody want to raise a question about them before I move on? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you speak a little bit about Liberia?
Oh, yeah. I have to admit, I don't know very much about Liberia. Maybe when I get to my next slide, I'm going to talk about the role. I just said before that a really big difference in the consequences of globalization depends on the kind of government one has. And so maybe when we talk about that, you may know or probably know more about the situation in Liberia than I do. I'm sorry, I just don't know that much.
No
sorry. Okay, it's on my to-do list. All right, let me let me go back to my slides here. Okay, from current slide, I can't.
And Leroy, I think when as he's looking for this the correct slide and so on, when we get to discussion, by all means, raise in your case, in all of your cases, what you see in terms of the ways in which globalization is kind of you feel the effects of globalization in your particular country. So.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. I would love to share about Liberia greatly when it comes to globalization.
Yeah. So hold on to that, and then let's have David finish up.
Okay. All right. So can everybody see this this slide again between individuals within countries? Yeah. Okay. Good. So we're going back, moving along very briskly. Okay. So a third challenge or problem of globalization is that globalization does lead to very large multinational corporations, right? I listed a few here: Amazon, Chase, it's a bank, Toyota, Alibaba is a Chinese company, and there are multiple problems or potential problems related to these multinational corporations. I sort of tried to sum them up by saying, are these multinational corporations too big to control, especially because they are not just in one jurisdiction, not just in one nation. So they can try to play off one country against another, or try to move their headquarters, or avoid taxes. So that is a persistent problem. Begum, I saw your hand.
Thumbs. It was thumbs.
Oh.
Sorry.
Oh, that was a thumb. Okay. 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 So final point here is the pace of change. And I like this phrase, creative destruction. This phrase, creative destruction, was coined by a man, Joseph Schumpeter, who lived several decades ago and wrote about capitalism and socialism. And he argued that capitalism, the free market, and globalization both created and destroyed, right? And we can take this in multiple ways, right? So, think about think about technologies, right? If you your parents maybe, or if you're old enough, several decades ago, if you wanted to watch a new movie, you would go to the movie theaters, right? Then came along video cassettes. Okay, and the fear was at least that video cassettes would undermine or weaken movie theaters. Maybe it hasn't done that. What happened to the video cassette industry? That was replaced by the DVD industry, right? And then the DVD industry was replaced by the streaming industry. So that's an example of some companies or whole industries being destroyed, or at least being weakened, and new industries, new companies coming along. In many countries, there are industries that were very important, have now moved elsewhere, right? So in the United States, where we used to have a lot of factories producing automobiles and steel and things like that, uh, there's a whole part of the country called the Rust Belt, right? That many of those factories have been closed. Many of those businesses have moved elsewhere. Some of you last time also talked about how maybe trade with the outside world could challenge or bring in outside values that you didn't like. That might also be a form of creative destruction. So, capitalism, even when it's working well, involves fast change, often very, very fast change, which can undermine things that people are familiar with. It can undermine communities, and that is something that's really, really hard to wrestle with, or to respond to. It can feel very threatening. It can be very threatening. Okay, so I would hold on to that term, creative destruction. It sort of captures both sides. All right, let me move on, just because I know that time is short. Okay, so let me say something about markets, or free markets, or capitalism, and states or governments. So there has been a debate about, and with some people claiming that one side is right, or one side can operate on its own, either the market or the governments, and we don't need the other side. I would say that argument that one side is enough, or one side is the good side and the other side is the bad side. I think that argument is passé, is no longer really that interesting. And I think what's become clearer is that actually you need both. That the free market, or globalization, has to be complemented, has to be you need effective governments to support and manage markets. So let me just give you some examples of what I mean by this. Okay, what are some things that, okay, that's what I just said here, state complement each other. So the market needs the state for several things. Law and order, right? Without stability, without peace, without a functioning justice system, markets are probably not going to work well for a broad part of the population. Markets or companies might work well for some people who have connections to those in power, but they're not going to work well, broadly speaking. I know, I think 2 weeks ago, I saw the recording of your meeting, and I think a number of you, or Paul maybe, and then a number of you talked about the problem of corruption. So I'm including here by law, I mean an effective justice system that is not favoring some groups or some individuals. Okay, so what else do we have here? Well, the government is really necessary to provide education. There's a term we can call education human capital, right? Human building up what's in people's heads and the skills people have. That's necessary. Governments are also necessary for infrastructure, things like roads, bridges, harbors. The government is also necessary, I would say, to help people out, right? If they hit hard times, or if there's a recession, or if they're injured, or sick, the government is necessary to regulate various kinds of markets, right? I don't think that companies on their own or competition on its own is going to keep businesses honest. You actually need a government to do that. And a fourth area in many countries that, and this might include a lot of your countries, in many places of the world that feel they need to catch up, right? That they need to industrialize or build up rapidly. Governments have played are playing an important role in trying to steer the economy, right? Trying to build up certain industries, trying to encourage trade or to make industrialization more rapid than otherwise. So this is sometimes called industrial policy. Or at the bottom there, I have the term a developmental state, so a government that's really trying to develop the economy. And countries do all of these things to different degrees, right? All right, I'm really running short on time here. Okay, so let me just say briefly, and then if there's any time remaining, we can talk about your particular countries or any of your thoughts. This is a really tricky balance between the state and the market. It's not like you achieve it at one time and then it remains stable. It's also not the case that in each country you're going to have the same balance, right? So, for example, in Europe, compared to the United States, there's a more generous welfare state, right? There are more generous provisions if you are unemployed or retired or sick than in the United States. And so there's not necessarily a one size fits all balance. But I think generally speaking, and I'm going to generalize a great deal here, we can distinguish between two challenges to get some kind of balance. One is that if governments are too smothering, right? If states are too strong. Now that can range from North Korea. I don't think, well, yeah, we have nobody from North Korea here, an out and out dictatorship, to countries like perhaps China more recently, right? Where the government is, I don't know if you follow this, but the government is kind of trying to reassert its power from the market, scaring off high-tech companies. So maybe the state can be too strong. But governments can also be too weak. And this can come in different forms, right? It can mean that the government literally maybe doesn't control the entire territory within their borders. It can mean that there are rivals to governments, militias, let's say, who control. It can mean that certain parts of the government are, effectively belong to certain parties or groups or militias, and those parts of the government help their people. Even in I would include the United States here, right? Which one might say in many ways has a very strong government. Perhaps overseas its government is too strong, but in some ways, because inequality has grown so bad in the United States, sort of in subtle ways, powerful businesses and business interest groups can sort of persuade, or what's called capturing, parts of the state. So it's not that you have the kinds of corruption in the United States are, people walking in with a suitcase full of $100 bills. Maybe that happens once in a while, but it's more subtle kinds of persuasion or capture in which very strong economic interests, market interests, have kind of shaped government policy in their interests. So, for example, right now, or I would say over the last 40 years, banks and people who are able to invest money in stock markets have probably have had much more influence than workers' unions, let's say labor unions. Labor unions have been weakened over the last 40 or 50 years. So maybe I'll just leave it there. I know this is all kind of a little vague, and I've had to here lump together all sorts of different cases, but and I think I've just reached my time limit.
All good, David. And I think we have time for discussion, because I think what I'm going to do is not pressure you guys to take the post survey at the end of this meeting. We have just too much to cover. This will also give you guys more time to kind of read things over, think about things, and then provide your answers as best you can, because you want to, for your own benefit, you want to see improvement. If you want an honors certificate or one of the cash awards, you want to see improvement in your answers from the pre-survey to the post-survey. So I want to give you guys more time. So we're not going to do it today, but it has to be kind of before next Sunday, you have to take the survey. So I just to kind of get to some of the things that people have been pointing out here. I guess I want to come back to Leroy. Leroy, and let me preface my question to you. And I do want to hear, for instance, from Juliana in Brazil. So just a heads up, Juliana, it would be great if you're willing and you're comfortable speaking to hear from you about your perspective on this discussion. What I'm particularly interested from you guys is this problem of weak or captured states, because I think that that's a major problem in a lot of countries. And one could say it certainly seems to be the case, Leroy, and my impression, tell me if I'm wrong, is that the state seems to be captured in the sense that it is in Liberia and other places, it is controlled by certain interests, whether these be rich people, a particular ethnic group, a particular political party that serves its own people, rather than serving everybody the way that they're supposed to be serving. And Abdul, you're reporting here from Ghana about this policy that was meant to strengthen human capital by providing free education at the high school level, but there wasn't the infrastructure. Well, perhaps the argument is there wasn't the infrastructure because the government is captured by people who are enriching themselves, or their political party, their ethnic group, etc., their military, whatever, at the expense of investment in education, in school infrastructure, in the buildings and the supplies and the teachers, etc., and so forth. So I want to preface, I want to ask you guys, what do you think about this problem of weak or captured states, and whether it's in fact happening in your countries? And if you think that is one of the more serious problems, or do you see something else that's more serious a problem, whether it's like foreign control of governments or something like that? Leroy.
Yeah, it just seems like you was thinking about what I was anticipating to talk on. Our system of government here is our state need to be rescued, just like you were saying. It has been solely run by, or it has been solely governed by group of guys that I solely there for the purpose of enriching themselves. they are using the opportunistic method of government to, get the public funds and get build themselves properties in and out of the country for the children. As a result of this, you will notice that globalization has little effects on our society, especially Liberia, because for a typical example, you notice that a company will come in Liberia that should at least help in the building of roads and sponsoring students to go to school, learn, and be able to work in the country and contribute to the society. When those companies come, the government will negotiate and take the money that should be used to build those roads and carry on those development. And when they take the funds from them, the funds will be diverted into a particular person's account or into few individuals' account. So when that is done, you will notice that the country will continue to cry for better road condition or better road system, and the government will not talk. They will sit aside. That's why you see, if you've been following, you will notice that over the past few years, Liberians have been protesting for better education, for better roads, and so forth and stuff like that. So they are all as a result of government enriching themselves about forgetting about the native people, forgetting about the citizens that they should be serving.
Okay, thanks, Leroy. Chia, who's joining us from United Arab Emirates, but is from Cameroon.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Paul and David. Thank you. You can hear me?
Yes, it's probably better if you take your headphones off. The likelihood is that's reducing our ability to hear you, but that's not possible.
So you can hear me now, right?
Better, yes.
So yes, the situation also in my country, Cameroon, as well, is disturbing because right now we have political crisis and the government is unable to govern because there are some part like the English Cameroon, the government cannot really govern this area because of the crisis, because the freedom fighters have decided to pick up guns because of the treatment the government is giving them, or let's say the French Cameroon is giving them, which is the 75% of Cameroon is French, and as you know, English Cameroon have 25%. So English Cameroon has been protesting for long regarding the treatment in courts, in schools, and other sector, public sectors. Since nothing has been done, they decided to protest, and because of the protest, the government cracked down on them seriously, and that wouldn't stop them. They have picked up guns, and now there is a lot of problems over there. Also, there are people who will really love to develop my country as well. And there are a lot of contracts. When the contracts came in to help and build the roads and build the public schools or other develop institution for the country, what they will do, they will sign the contract really good, and the contractors will start their job very well, but the money starts from top to bottom. Like the money will start from the governor. The governor might be take his share, going to the divisional officer, or taking his share. The contractor take his share before he reach. Maybe the contract, maybe they will just do something like not even what to think. Might be stop it halfway. Might be at last it ended like that, and nothing will be done. And that is how the system has been ruling.
Mm.
And these are the problems.
Gee, a quick question. So there's a conflict between the English speaking and the French speaking portions of your population. Who's in power right now? Is it the English speaking or the French speaking in government?
Thank you. Who is in power is the French speaking.
Okay. And so
President Paul Biya is someone who has been there for almost 30-something years in power right now.
gotcha. And the
So he is there.
English speaking part is a minority, or
Yeah,
the French is the majority. Okay.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
That is it. Yeah. They
Yeah.
are a minority.
Yeah. Thanks for giving us that perspective on Cameroon. We've got Nusrat who's joining us from Bangladesh. And in Nusrat's case, you said something earlier, Nusrat, about creative destruction also exists in Bangladesh. Do you want to explain?
Yes, yeah, I want to explain. Even I want to explain a lot, because when David was explained everything, and I was thinking like we all have this problem. I mean, including all of these advantages. So I want to explain everything. The first one, as I already mentioned my previous session, it's like the overproduction, and overproduction causes some problem with our environment, some problems with the climate change. As I would say, we have a lots of industries. Even you can't believe, not only in our capital city, but also other cities, including metropolitan cities, including small cities. They also have a lots of industries. Even those are not necessary, I would say, including some of the shoes companies, cosmetics companies, and I would say they always contaminate the environment, and I would say it's a overproduction. We really don't need it. And the second thing, inequality, I would say it also exists in a short, I would say like some people I have noticed, like some foreign countries, and they hire people from our country over online because it's cheap, and they can hire us with a very cheap salary. So it's another problem, and I would say it's a sort of inequality. And the third thing, as I said, like creative distraction, yes, it's also exists. I can say previously we always bought our local products, especially the food and other items when it was available. Still it's available, but the people, when they see like something is from the foreign countries, they think maybe those are very good, even it's not. And the quality is also the same, but they always think when it comes from another places, as some of the examples were given, like the Amazon or any other website or platforms, and they think if I buy from that platforms, maybe those are good. But in the real scenario, those are not. And it's the same as like our products, but people always think like if I can buy from that places, then it's good. And to some extent, I would say it's also some people, they want to show their status. They think if I bought something from another places, buy from the foreign countries, or maybe something branded, maybe I will show my status in my society. So it's also related to the creative distraction, and I think sort of, I would say to some extent, it's also like inequality. So yeah, so that's I want to say briefly. We all have these problems, and yeah.
It's interesting, Nusrat mentioned this kind of like, it seems kind of status. Sorry, I'm gonna mute you for a moment, just because whenever I speak, I hear some background noise on your end. But what's interesting in part in what you say is kind of this heightened status competition that comes with globalization, it seems, where people want to be, you know, more American, or they want to be more European, or they want to be more this or that, and they'll put on certain clothing, certain handbags, certain cars, et cetera, and so forth, because it shows that they've made it. And it kind of, as I think David was suggesting in a previous slide, in some of the disadvantages of globalization, it undermines a sense of community and a sense of that in some sense we're all in this together and that we have to help each other. Instead, there's this kind of status, vicious status competition that happens where people are trying to, you know, make sure that they're richer than other people. And so, yeah, I'm interested in that. Nusrat, did you have anything to follow up with there before we turn to Begum?
No, yeah, I just want to say yes, and they just want to show their status, and there isn't any good relation, you can say right now. I would say in Southeast Asian countries, usually they were very family oriented, and I can say like when even when I was staying with my parents, and that moment I can see like my parents, they were visited to the another families, and also my relatives, they usually visited our places, but right now they are not, because they are only focused on the consumerism. You can say they only the products, they are not focused on their family, they are not focused on their community, they don't have any I would say they don't emphasize to make a good relation with the neighbors or with the society. They are always like intent to buy the products, intent to show their status, even when in case it's very interesting. If you just participate in any occasion here, in my country, like in any wedding program or any celebration, that moment you will see like everyone just judging what the other people is wearing, like what's the price of the ornament, what's the price of the clothing item, what's the price of the bag and everything, and only gossip about it. There isn't any conversation about any other topics. They only talk about that. Like competition, and the people, when if anyone want to participate that sort of programs, before planning that, they always think like what I can wear, and I have to wear the best, I have to wear some foreign items, foreign clothing items, or maybe any other thing that can show my status. So this is going happening, I mean, I would say happening right now in my country, and the people mentality is also changing day by day, and it's very fast.
Okay. Thanks, Nusrat. So Begum, and then I would love to hear from Juliana in Brazil, if you're willing to share your perspective. But otherwise, also from Pakistan, we have a few people. Would love to hear the perspective from you guys, or from Justice or Chirunim in Nigeria. Begum.
Thank you. Well, I want to make a very brief comment about my country, because I think only half an hour is left behind for the end of until the end of the meeting. So if I want to make a general overview about Turkish state and market, the relationship between state and markets, and also what kind of effect globalization has had on Turkish economy. Well, in Turkey, I think there are three important things that are affecting the state and market relationship in a very bad way. The first thing is the political patronage, I don't know how to pronounce. Patronage, right?
Patronage.
Patronage, sorry. So the first one is the political patronage characteristics of Turkish political culture. So there are some big corporations, like 5 or 6 big corporations, and the ruling party, the government, give all the infrastructure, the railways, roads, and also big apartments, buildings. So we can see their names in every corner. So making all these streets, big boulevards, on whatever you can think of. And so this patronage undermine the equality of competition. So I think in a free liberal market economy, everyone should have the equal rights to compete and to get this. In Turkish it is called ihale, but I don't know how in English I can say it. So many companies, they compete for a specific construction of a big building, for example. So like 5 or 6 companies compete, but it's not a fair competition. That always this big corporations to work together with the government. They also make this, the third bridge, the Bosphorus, in Istanbul, connecting the two sides of Istanbul to parts of Istanbul. So this political patronage is an important negative thing in my country, undermining state and market balanced relationship. I think also this negatively affects the perception of the global markets about Turkey. So how the global foreign capital sees Turkey. There is, as weak rule of law. Yes, there is a high degree of corruption, unfortunately. I used to write an article about that, comparing, two opposite poles. New Zealand is the best country in terms of has the least level of corruption, but Turkey is, has a devastating degree of corruption. So this corruption, political patronage, and the unequal distribution of some public resources, be they corporations or some individual businessmen who promote this religious and nationalistic motives around their community. Maybe they just make an electoral basis for the ruling government, but also they just get benefits from the government. So this is quite bad. I'm sorry, I would make it a brief overview. So that's generally my comments, but I want to have a look at this world. I'm sorry, in English, because it's a very important word, so I'm checking it. It's tender. So the state tender or bid. Bid. So the companies compete for a bid,
Tenders,
but always what?
Yeah, no, tenders or bids, yeah.
A tender or bid, because I was not aware of this word. So yes, bids. This makes this unequal public resource allocation even worse today. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Begum. Any others who would like to comment? Juliana? Yeah.
Hey. Just a quick comment about the effect of globalization here in Brazil. It's coming from the inequality of the accessibility here from child to adults. It turns about the access for education, for example, and affect the entire life of people. Some kind of types of, sorry, I'm not really good in talking public, so what I want to share here in Brazil is that the inequality is real and unfortunately affect the entire life of people and decrease the opportunities, and it's a effect of globalization too. So just a quick comment.
Great, Juliana. No, I really appreciate the fact if for you English is not your first language, so I really appreciate you trying to kind of convey what's going on in Brazil. Clearly, inequality is a big problem in Brazil, right? And globalization probably has aggravated inequality in Brazil. So it's good to hear your perspective, and that seems to be central for a lot of people in Brazil. Because you guys are one of the rising economies in the world, so it's really important to hear from and you also happen to have one of the largest populations in the world, so it's really important to hear from you guys. So I appreciate you speaking. Fatima from Pakistan, and then let's have David offer any thoughts on what you've heard before we shift to citizen diplomacy. Fatima.
Hi everyone. Hi Paul. Um, I would like to talk about the effect of globalization on Pakistan, especially because I live here and I can see the culture. So there are some negative and some positive effects. Uh, I can see that the younger generation is so much impressed from foreigners, and they always want to carry themselves like foreigners, it has replaced, I think, our own culture. They want to dress up like that. They want to look like foreigners. So, like whether if English or they are French people, but they want to look like Western people. So it has replaced our culture a lot in every province. As Paul, you know that I travel a lot in my own country, so I can see different cities, and everywhere it's the same. So this because of this globalization and everything is so in excess, like everybody, every child and every younger person can see the other countries. So it has replaced our culture. People copy the other people and get attracted so much toward other countries, like they don't talk about their own culture anymore. They don't read their books, the or on Pakistani books. They don't read them anymore. And what else is there is like it also has to some extent it has destroyed our own industry, because whenever it comes to makeup, cosmetics, or the clothes or shoes or purses or anything which we women use, so we prefer to buy, from not from local brand. How much is good, how the local brands are good, but we prefer to buy some imported things. So it has damaged our local industry as well. Like whenever we use something from local brands, so people say, oh, okay, you're using this brand. I bought this from abroad. So, it has like whatever Pakistani do for to improve the brand, but we believe that local things are not good. And obviously it creates unequal economic growth, and so many things are positive as well, like the trend of IT education. It spread in our country because of globalization, and because like the world is has so much IT scope, so that's why we understand our younger generation that we should learn IT skills, and then we will be able to do something. And because of the globalization, they have learned a lot. Like our generation has learned a lot, so many things which we were unaware. So this is the thing, and because of the globalization, they have innovation ideas, and there is a healthy competition as well. And they have improved their living standards as well. And plus, if I talk about myself personally, as I have written as well in the comment, that first time I visited US, I think in 2012 or 13, 10 years back. So I was so naive. I didn't understand the real meaning of education at that time, though I was training officer at that time as well. But I remember that I was not even, I didn't understand the real meaning of education. So one of my friend asked me that, do you know this skill and that skill? And I said, no, I don't know. Then she said, like, you're educated and you don't know these skills. She was talking particularly about the driving skills and swimming and, these kind of things. So I said, like, what is the connection between skills and education? So at that time, I got the idea that, okay, so uh, people think the educate people take educated people as a skillful person, and we only get degrees. So after that, I brought this innovation in my trainings form, and I used to tell teachers, like from last 10 or 11 years, I used to tell teachers that you have to teach skills to your students. So this was my personal experience. It was so good. I travel and I learn a lot. So it benefit me. Thank you.
Fatima, thank you for sharing. So David, any thoughts on what's been said? Sorry.
Well, yeah, I mean, so it was interesting to hear, such a range of concerns. Several of you were talking about the problems of corruption in your countries, where government contracts were used to enrich to went into the pockets of politicians, and that is that's a really big challenge. I think that maybe happens especially where the population, perhaps because of reasons of colonialism or historical reasons, where the population itself is kind of divided based on language or ethnic background or religion, then that makes it harder to create a government and government officials who have some sense that they are supposed to and will look out for everybody, for the general interest, and it makes it much easier for this kind of capture. And then some of you talked about the role of status competition, which is, of course, rampant in our country as well. I thought I appreciated that Fatima ended by talking both about sort of the problems of globalization and the gains of globalization. I mean, I tried to do that on my slides. I think it is often easy to focus sort of on to focus kind of narrowly. I mean, this happens to me too, on the either the bad, this bad thing or this good thing. But globalization is really, it's a big process that has good aspects and bad. I guess I'll wrap up by saying, I think last week several of you said you felt that globalization was unstoppable, inevitable. And I agree with that. And maybe one thing that's driving globalization is technologies of communication and of transportation. I would say that even if it's inevitable, there are different versions of globalization. This is something that I didn't have time to get to, but different countries are dealing with globalization. Some are profiting, are benefiting more than other countries, and also in terms of different periods of time. There have been different versions of globalization in which, for example, right now, we didn't get to talk about this, but financial globalization, money moving very easily across borders, that is a very disruptive form, or can be very disruptive and can lead to sort of a chain reaction of financial panics. And there have been earlier forms of globalization, like right after World War II, where you had a lot of trade in goods, in material things, but there was not as much movement of money around the world. So while globalization may be inevitable in some form, there are different paths that it can take, and we have to work toward better outcomes. Maybe Paul's learning life is one grain of sand, or one effort in this direction to make a better form of globalization.
Great. David, thank you, because that was a great transition into what I hope is more than a grain of sand, which is citizen diplomacy, and particularly family diplomacy.
It's the Sahara Desert. Yeah, it's a big.
Can you shut down your PowerPoint presentation?
Yes, I will
for
do
some
that.
reason can't figure out how to do that myself. And
Yes.
would have been good to see you all while we were having this discussion.
Sure.
I want to quickly kind of transition us to talking about citizen diplomacy, precisely because when we're faced with all these problems, it's worth thinking about what we can do about it. And so citizen diplomacy is one answer to this, to all of these problems that we're facing. And the family diplomacy that we're developing is just one example of citizen diplomacy. So I'm going to share my screen and show you hold on a second, because that's not the right slide. Cancel that. And show you guys this a set of PowerPoint slides on citizen diplomacy. And I'm going to run through this fairly quickly, and then we'll have a little bit of time for discussion at the end, and probably won't have time to review things, but we do have nice a separate presentation with just a set of review slides so that you can look at those. You'll have access to all of these things, as I mentioned before, so that you can kind of prepare for the post-survey and write as well as you can for the post-survey. So what is citizen diplomacy? There are two definitions that I'd like to lay out. The first is that it is essentially dialogue and/or collaboration between citizens across country borders. And that can be for all kinds of purposes: educational, cultural, religious, economic, political, or else. The second definition is a different one, which is that that every citizen, every global citizen, has the right, even the responsibility, to engage across cultures and to create shared understanding through meaningful person-to-person interactions. Citizen diplomacy is here recognized as a powerful force in building and sustaining a secure, economically sound, and socially interconnected world. So the difference between these definitions is that one is more descriptive. It's about dialogue and collaboration between people and across countries. The other is more of an ethic. It's arguing that we have the right, even the responsibility, to engage across borders. But both are to some extent important. So I'm going to skip the question because in the interest of time, and focus on a few things about citizen diplomacy. One is that citizen diplomats can act individually or in groups. Two is that they can act with or independent of governments. And this is rather important. Sometimes citizen diplomats work with governments, sometimes they don't. And there are good reasons not to sometimes work with governments, especially if governments are trying to use citizen diplomats for their own purposes. So developing a kind of independent citizen diplomacy is important. Some key questions to ask when you're thinking about citizen diplomacy is, who do the citizen diplomats represent? In the case of family diplomacy, you may, for instance, come to represent Fatima, you may come to represent women, poor women, rural women in Pakistan, right? Or just women and mothers in Pakistan and the family kind of issues that they face. That's one example. Leroy in Liberia, you have this issue with, your mom is essentially persecuted for leaving an abusive husband who essentially took on a second wife, and then there was conflict, et cetera, and so forth, and kind of forging her own life. There's a story to be told there about single mothers, and so you could come to represent as a son, in some sense, kind of the sons and the family members that suffer at the hands of other families that are essentially kind of oppressing your family. So representation is one issue. Activities. So in other words, what kinds of things do we do together? What kinds of things do the citizen diplomats do? In our case, we hold dialogues, we network, and we build your skills and your knowledge, right? Those are the kinds of things that we're focused on in order to increase your power. Resources. What resources do we bring to bear? What resources do we bring to the table? So again, here the resources, think back to the discussion about power. Resources include things like us, right? The fact that we're a network, we know each other, we're connected to each other, we are a resource unto ourselves. The skills that you guys bring and the knowledge that you guys bring to these conversations is also a resource. It is a form of power, or a resource for power, for exercising power. Scale is how many people and countries are involved in the citizen diplomacy. In our case, we have a lot of people in different parts of the world who are connected to us. We have over 16,000 people in our Facebook group. We have this much smaller group of you and prior, from last year, prior family diplomats who are developing their capabilities as family diplomats. So how many people and how many nations participate? And then lastly, and this is important, is how many people and nations are impacted by our work, right? So that's going to take a while, but through building our network, through building our knowledge and our skills, we build our impact in the long term. Okay, some varieties of citizen diplomacy. There's digital diplomacy that happens between individuals in groups voicing their views online to influence each other or to influence governments. There's city diplomacy, where cities and regional governments are working to cross-nationally to develop trade, to develop education, culture, environmental projects, et cetera, and so forth between their countries. Between their cities. There's health diplomacy, where, in fact, during COVID, this was an example of where there was a lot of health diplomacy, a lot of collaboration across borders to try to deal with this problem of the pandemic. There is peace-building diplomacy. For instance, when nuclear scientists talk across borders, for instance, Iranian and US nuclear scientists, their governments may not talk to each other, but Iranian and there are organizations actually helping to bring together nuclear scientists across borders to help with reducing the risk of nuclear war and the risk of nuclear accidents. Sports diplomacy. That's not just happening right now with the World Cup, which I think just happened today. In fact, I don't know who won. Was it the English or the Spaniards? Who won? Does anybody know? Nobody knows? Anyway, so there was a World Cup for women, the women's teams, and the English and the Spaniards were competing. And I think they played already, but that's an example of
Spain.
Spain won.
Spain won.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Okay, that was my choice. So the sports diplomacy happens not just at the elite level. There is something called grassroots sports diplomacy, where ordinary people work and collaborate across borders on whatever sport. It could be judo, it could be soccer or else, in order to build peace between countries and collaboration. There's culinary or food diplomacy. There's arts diplomacy, and then there are other varieties of diplomacy. There's educational, scientific, environmental, wildlife, religious, business, et cetera, and so forth. So let me, instead of, I'm going to skip this because I need to kind of cover stuff, the question, but tell you about trends that are favoring the growth of citizen diplomacy. First is international transportation. It makes it easier for us to travel across borders to get to know each other, by train, by highways, by planes, et cetera, and so forth. Two, and we're using it right now, global communications, the internet, Zoom, television, et cetera, and so forth. All of these things are helping us to build citizen diplomacy. Three is increasing education. And here you may not have thought of all the things that are involved, but education tends to open our horizons. We tend to be less provincial and more open to new ideas and new cultures when we get more education. It's not always the case. It depends on the kind of education you're getting, but generally speaking, that's the case. It also increases our curiosity about other people, our empathy for people who are different from us, and our support for general ideas that support essentially human rights and social justice. So individualism, the belief that individuals are important, that they have rights that need to be protected, freedom, the concept that people should be able to do what they wish, pursue their dreams, et cetera, and so forth, and be protected. Equality, what that looks like, equality in education, equality in income, equality in other things under the law. Those are up for debate, but the point is equality is increasingly important as an idea. Justice as well, rule of law, and other liberal ideas are spreading because of education. And lastly, democratization, the spread of human rights, rule of law, elections, and governments' accountability to their peoples is part of what's promoting and building citizen diplomacy. Challenges to citizen diplomacy. A lot of citizen diplomacy organizations lack funding or don't have reliable funding. We have relatively very little funding for what we do, but we do a lot of it as volunteers. 2 is inefficient or effective communication and collaboration between citizen diplomacy groups. 3 is that results can take years, while commitments and volunteers and target populations can be fleeting or unreliable. In other words, it takes a long time to make social change, right? Family diplomacy is not going to happen and it's not going to be effective over years. It's going to take decades. And it takes consistent work by people to make it happen, right? But people come and go. And so that's one of the biggest challenges that citizen diplomacy organizations face. Number 4 is impact can be hard to measure. We're going to be measuring your knowledge gains from this training, from the pre-survey and the post-survey through one question that we asked you to fill out in 10 minutes. It's not exactly a perfect measure, but it is a measure of the impact we're having on your knowledge as citizen diplomats. And then there's this problem of scrutiny. As we become more influential as citizen diplomats, we face the risk of suppression by authoritarian regimes and greater criticism by people who see us as threatening. So benefits are a few of citizen diplomacy. One is it increases tolerance for difference and builds more trust and less conflict. 2 is that it develops international governance, uniformity and expectations to some extent, what we expect because we're all learning about each other and what we have and what we don't have. It creates kind of shared expectations about what people should have. And that can build towards a better, more equitable international governance. 3 is greater accountability of governments to their peoples. One of the reasons why we're developing family diplomacy is because we want you to be able to exercise more pressure and influence on the governments to do what is good for you and your families and other families like them. Less inequality is number 4 due to the increasing sharing of knowledge and resources. Number 5 is increasing cooperation for mutual benefit. Number 6 is increasing capable and caring citizens, right? In the process of learning about each other, we care more about each other, right? The more we know about each other, the more we care about each other. And that matters a lot to our ability to have impact in the world. And then lastly here is development of a global civil society. We are an element of global civil society, and we're building that element as we speak. So I believe that's it. So I'm going to stop it there because we're almost at time, and stop sharing my screen and ask you guys if you have questions or comments. Would love to hear from Chirunim Justice in Nigeria, from who else have we not heard of? Farzana from Pakistan. Abdul, I know that you're having issues with a lot of noise and so on, but it would be great to hear from you guys, your thoughts on what you've heard about today in terms of citizen diplomacy, but also globalization. Chirunim, looks like you are looking to participate. Chirunim, can you hear us? Chidunim is joining us from Nigeria. He may not be able to hear us. Others among you have comments or thoughts. Anything in particular that struck you? I do want to, while you guys, you can raise your hands on this stuff, but I do want to point out some things that Abdul has been sharing. He says that Ghana is likely to lose some ties with the US for failure to accept the LGBTQ community, and all this can be directed to globalization. Also, my country been over dependent on aid from other countries. LGBTQ, if just in case you don't know what that is lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgendered communities. That is an international issue to some extent. To the extent the United States sometimes wants to support those rights. Depends on what government, what administration is in power. Sometimes they don't want to support those rights, and that can affect international aid. Other thoughts on this or else?
Will you send the survey link? Because you said we have to do it until next week.
Yes. So you'll have until, but you have to do it before next Sunday, essentially. So I'm going to be sending the link. I will send you all of the slides. I'm going to share a link to all of the slides and so on. But then, and I'll do that probably today or tomorrow. And then I will share the link. So you'll have everything that you need if you want to review slides, et cetera, and so forth. One thing, though, I just want to emphasize, so you should not cheat. So the point is for you to spend that 10 minutes in the survey just covering what is in your head, not what you can cut and paste from whatever document into the answers. It has to be from your head, and you should not be looking at any material when you write. So just spend 10 minutes writing based upon what you learn. But before you write, you can spend however much time, and I encourage you to spend time just looking over the slides and thinking about things, because I just do want to remind you that your ability to get an honor certificate and then ultimately the cash awards depends on how you perform, how you improve in the post-survey, and in the storytelling part 2 of the how you improve in your storytelling ability, right? So it's both of those things that are going to determine whether you get honors and the cash awards. Any questions about that or else? Okay. All right, guys. Oh, Fatima, go ahead.
Also, we didn't take picture today.
I have a question that when we will be sharing the stories and everything, so it should be like the story of our society, our country, or it can be our own story, own sufferings.
It has to be a family story. It can be about your family, or it can be about another family, but it has to focus, and I'm going to just mute you because there's a lot of interference there. So it has to be a family story. So it has to focus on a family, but it doesn't have to be your family. It can be another family that you know. So for instance, Chidu Neem from Nigeria last year actually won an award. And he didn't tell a story about his family. He told us a harrowing, just like terrible story about a woman and her husband who tried to emigrate to Europe from Nigeria, and they were not able to, and they had a horrific story. So that's an example of a family story. Does that answer your question, Fatima?
Like what if some woman has been suffered a lot and because of the many things of the society, so can I add that story as well, if a story of a woman, a single woman?
Yes. So you can talk, we'll learn more about this, and we'll have plenty of time in part 2 to discuss your stories, and you can change your stories as you go. So don't feel like you have to like the story you tell at the beginning is a story you have to stick with, but you do want to focus on a family and a family, and you can bring in the stories of other families as part of that, but it's best, generally speaking, to focus on one family and then to weave in other families as necessary to your storytelling.
Actually, every single woman is suffering. So it would be a story of one woman, but it will show you how our society react on when a woman talk about rights or anything.
Exactly.
So, okay.
Yep, exactly. So you want to focus on a family, but that family can be emblematic or exemplify many other families, right? The story of one woman and her suffering that represents the suffering of a lot of other women or mothers.
Yeah. Thank you.
Sure. Okay. We'll have lots of opportunity to discuss the storytelling part 2. I want to this coming the next Sunday and beyond. But I want to thank David for coming to speak with us about globalization. It is really important to all of our lives. It's affecting us in so many different ways, and it has implications for us as family diplomats. And that's part of the reason why we are learning about globalization. So you've learned a little bit about citizen diplomacy. You've learned about families. And I hope when we do we see your post surveys, that we'll see lots of kind of insightful connections that you're making and references to what you've learned. All right, everybody. Fatima, Begum, Juliana, Chia, Leroy, Chirunim, Abdul, Nusrat, Farzana, and Justice. Thanks for joining us, and see you next Sunday.
And I just want to also say thank you so much. It was so nice meeting all of you, even if only briefly. And I admire what you're all doing here together. So
and
keep
I
up the good
forgot.
work.
I have to take a photo of everybody. I'm sorry. Can you guys open up your cameras briefly? I'm also losing my voice here. Justice, Abdul, excellent. Perfect, guys. Farzana, if you happen to be paying attention, or Justice, on 3, 1, 2, 3, smile. Fantastic. Let me just make sure everybody had their yes. Everybody's smiling, all good. Thanks for your time, guys, and see you next Sunday.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye. See you.